Hello everyone, it's ASMR Duck. Quack, quack, quack. And today I want to talk to you about something that I've been researching and looking into, which is the relationship of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, otherwise known as CPTSD, and toxic shame and procrastination. Now, I am not a licensed health professional, and the purpose of this video is one, to help, give you something genuine, to also help with my journey of lifelong learning, and to hopefully make the internet a little bit of a more encouraging and better place. And also, if you relate to themes in this video, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have CPTSD. So it can apply to the things we're going to talk about, can apply to anyone. And I'm going to talk about kind of the cycle that can be created with toxic shame and procrastination. And procrastination, or the, inability to get things done, or watching the problems of life pile up over time, is often a symptom of a deeper issue, which can be toxic shame. But I also want to clarify that it doesn't mean that you are inherently flawed or broken. If I can do anything for you today, it's to help dispel that myth and offer some perspective and ways in which you can maybe rejig or reconceptualize this, and that in certain areas of your life, when you reach these crisis points, that there are tools and ways that you can slowly start reversing the process. But again, I'll emphasize, this is purely for entertainment and my learning process, not clinical advice. And so, take what from this video that is useful for you, and discard everything else. Alright, let's begin. So, life can be inherently hard, and that the problems that we deal with regularly are, constants with the change. But it doesn't mean that there's anything inherently wrong with that. But someone with who's dealing with mental health problems or toxic shame can interpret these triggers and stressors as very different to the way that a person who is secure does. Because a secure person, when they're encountering this, tends to have more compassionate self-talk. That could be like, something difficult is happening to me, and I am stressed about it, where the stress is acknowledged. And because it's viewed as a normal part of life, the next step is to find ways to cope with the event or whatever's going on in a manner that directly helps to solve the problem. And it is important to note that it is easier for someone with a secure attachment system or as well adjusted, because they frankly more likely have a supportive social network to lean on. And they have more developed strong emotional regulation, that they have learned or taught themselves, either in their childhood or adulthood. And additionally, they probably haven't faced a disproportionate amount of extreme life events. And while it's not guaranteed that a secure person or well-adjusted person hasn't experienced extreme stressors, it is less likely if they don't have a history of complex trauma, which generally means that they have more resources available to them. And so humans need comfort every day, and someone who isn't dealing with toxic shame or CPTSD is more likely to recognize when they need comfort and how to support themselves. So, for instance, if they're experiencing relationship issues, they might seek advice from a trusted friend or consult a professional to gain additional context and skills to navigate the challenge. And this sense of interconnectedness in a secure worldview makes it easier to access the services and social supports that you need. But for someone who's dealing with CPTSD or insecure attachment style or toxic shame, or all of the above, when you experience a life stressor, you might not recognize your own need for comfort and support, which with CPTSD, which usually results from repetitive trauma early in life, there can be a learned helplessness aspect. And if you've experienced that from also being under-resourced, you might develop a worldview that problems are unsolvable. And when a problem feels overwhelming, it can feel like there's no way out. And it might not occur to you that there are social resources available, or that you need comfort and support to navigate the challenge. And it may be internalized from a young age that social systems aren't actually there to help. And you might believe that they're for normal people, and you don't see yourself as normal, which is can be a core belief of toxic shame. And so consequentially, you might think that there aren't some social support networks for you. And yeah, you may not even be aware of your need for comfort. And may have even learned that dealing with life stressors meant sucking it up, or pushing down your feelings, or barreling through. But your system still needs comfort. Even if you repress the need for it, your body will naturally crave comfort during difficult periods. So, what tends to happen next for those who deny or repress the need for comfort and help during a life stressor is disregulation and procrastination. And if you have a strong need for comfort, help and support, but aren't aware of it, which is common for those with toxic shame, vulnerability can become a shame-bound emotion. And when you feel like you need help but can't figure it out on your own, shame can envelop that need. And this leads to dysregulation when we can't resolve the feelings we're experiencing. And if you've hidden your feelings from yourself because they're shame-bound, it can be very hard to resolve them. If you feel vulnerable because you don't understand what's going on in your relationship, you might become dysregulated. Instead of feeling vulnerable, you might feel, grumpy, irritated, have trouble sleeping, or extreme difficulty focusing on your projects or your other things in life that demand your attention. Because your system is desperately seeking the comfort that it needs, distracted by unmet emotional needs that reside in your body. And if you're not acknowledging these emotions in your mind and acting in accordance with them, dysregulation will occur. Now, the problem is that when we're in a state of extreme stress, it is crucial to focus on solving those issues. If a need to figure out again, going back to an example of relationship problems with your partner, you would need to stay in the present with your partner, listen and respond appropriately. However, the more dysregulated you are, the harder it is to do all of that. And so consequentially, you start procrastinating. Not because you're lazy or worthless, but because your system is preoccupied with trying to get its underlying needs met. And when you don't know how to meet those needs directly, you may turn to maladaptive coping mechanisms. You might use substances, or you might start a fight with your partner to get the support you can't ask for directly, but receive comfort afterwards. Or you might fear that your partner seeing you struggle will lead to disgust and abandonment, causing you to withdraw and isolate yourself. To avoid making these problems worse, you might isolate until the whole crisis is over. You might convince yourself that you can get through the day acting tough and strong, but promise yourself something at the end of the day to relieve the pressure. These coping mechanisms develop to meet your need of comfort indirectly often create further problems. There's a quote that goes, at a certain dosage, the medicine becomes a disease. Now, you might face a new slew of problems, or even an intensification of the original problem. And if you haven't found a way to work things out because you've been dysregulated or unable to concentrate, you might start to use these maladaptive processes to soothe yourself and end up in a cycle. And it might cause new problems in your relationships, even overshadowing the original issue. And as the pile of problems grows, the issues may escalate. For those dealing with CPTSD and toxic shame, this is often the point where toxic shame really sets in, and you begin to believe that the reason you have these problems is because you are inherently bad or shameful or broken. You may think to yourself, I should have just dealt with this when it first came up. Now look how big it's become. Look at all the other problems. And instead of correctly attributing the causes of these problems to not having learned proper coping mechanisms for sourcing comfort and support, you might start to blame yourself, thinking yourself useless. And then you may fall into a cycle of negative self-talk, comparing yourself to others as them being normal and you being an outlier in this. And so at this point, toxic shame and the inner critic might be incredibly present. And when you have toxic shame, the need for comfort becomes more intense. And so now we're back at the beginning. We need comfort, but we don't know how to get it. Or we feel unworthy of it. We're in a place of toxic shame. And so your system becomes dysregulated and the cycle starts all over again. And I know that's heavy and a lot. And I say that not to be discouraging. You are not fated to this cycle if you do struggle with these things. And I share this because, from what I've seen, there are ways to reverse this process and to start an upward spiral instead of a downward one when facing life stresses. And if you're dealing with CPTSD, there's a high chance that you've never had a period in your life that everything was normal, with no significant problems or challenges. And you may have even been locked in this cycle for as long as you remember. And that can lead to difficulty forming close relationships, regulating emotions, securing consistent resources. And you might not have the option to tackle this in one swift step by reaching out to a support network. So instead we need to look at what we can do at any point in this spiral to start moving in a more positive direction. And so in comes self-compassion and self-understanding in this process. For people with toxic shame, the term self-understanding might feel maybe a little more accessible. But I use self-understanding and self-compassion interchangeably. In the first place, to apply self-compassion is when you're faced with a significant stressor and have a need for comfort. Now, laid out like that, it may make sense, but during the time, it's unlikely that you'll recognize your need for comfort consciously if you're dealing with these issues. And if you never received comfort around life challenges, you might internalize the belief that unless something overly traumatic happens to you, you don't need or deserve support, care, compassion from other people. Secure people naturally, for the most part, understand that being alive is inherently difficult and that comfort is needed regularly. And you don't need to be going through something intense to need comfort. People need comfort on a day-to-day basis for being a little tired or having a bad day at work or dealing with, the minor tensions of relationships. Comfort is a normal need. everyone can feel overwhelmed by a situation and need comfort. But if you feel distressed and dysregulated, it's not because you're a bad or shameful person who can't cope. And if you have a difficult life, you have a high need for comfort. But if you don't recognize this need, it can throw things a bit out of whack. So, if at any point of feeling stressed or overwhelmed by problems, you can recognize and validate your need for comfort, then this could be the first step of being less dysregulated. So if you can see your financial, relationship, academic challenges as problems that naturally require comfort and support, it legitimizes the problems. It might not solve them, but it validates them. And so, following the threads of these problems back in time, you can maybe start to undo some of the toxic shame around them. And if you're in chaotic relationships, it's not because you're worthless or a human being that hates being happy. Or is it because you didn't learn how to, have a healthy relationship as a child? And so the more you start to call out and recognize your needs during times of difficulty, it can help start to diminish them. But dysregulation naturally leads to poor focus, and so understanding these problems through a compassionate lens, and maybe not expecting to solve it all in one go or have this become an overnight success, is probably a better way to look at it. Because you are deserving of having healthy human connections and a sense of self-esteem, self-worth, and creating stability in your life in all sense of the manner. So again, if your body is distracted by needing these things, not having them, you're not going to probably be at your best ability to focus. And again, this isn't to be discouraging, but to legitimize that it's okay to have these problems, and to address them and acknowledge them. Personally, I remember a moment in my life where I woke up and felt like an outsider, and looking in on my life and seeing the true intensity of some of the problems that I was dealing with at that point in my life. And it is really hard to have those moments of clarity, because if you've adapted to chronic problems and chronic dysregulation, it can become the forest that that you walk in. However, if it helps to stop and contextualize that for yourself as often as you can, because it's possible that anybody can be in this situation. If you have compassion for yourself in that moment, then you are experiencing a moment of security, and you can recognize that you are inherently a valuable person, just like everybody else, which means that when you experience stress, you need help and comfort, just like everybody else. And every time we have a moment where we successfully recognize this, we start slowly training our brain to think differently. And the more moments we have where we recognize we are inherently valuable, we are not choosing the challenges and the difficulties in our lives, and it's normal for us to need help and support when navigating through them. So the more we slowly inch our way towards that secure worldview, we start recognizing that we can ask for help, and there is no reason why someone else should get help and not us. We need comfort, support, and care, and there is no reason why we shouldn't have those things. And so I want to be clear on that, and it doesn't mean that any one particular person owes you endless care, love, support, and attention, but it means that it would be reasonable for you to build out social supports in which you're able to give and receive support around everyday concerns and stresses. Now, let's say that you aren't able to have a moment with yourself at the point where you need comfort, and it begins, and you find yourself getting a bit dysregulated. Instead of shaming yourself for not being able to directly tackle the problem, notice and accept. And you can say, oh, my system's out of whack today, I feel grumpy, feel angry, anxious, and I'm not arriving at the moment with the presence that I need to tackle this problem. In that moment, can you ask yourself, what is it that I need? The comfort that I need, or do I need help or support? Do I need rest? And is it possible, or when is it possible, to give that to yourself? Instead of denying that you have needs and pushing them down, and denying that something is impacting you, instead of pulling back and isolating yourself, or even trying to get comfort out of people without directly asking for it. If you can take a moment to recognize, am I feeling off today? You can use this as a tool to ensure that you're not creating new problems for yourself. And you can be mindful of which coping mechanisms that you turn to and which ones will actually help you get closer to solving the problem rather than further away from it or compounding it. And so if you're able to give compassion, self-understanding, this can be a first step to beginning a upward spiral. Because the goal here is to lessen the resistance we feel towards our own dysregulation and procrastination, and to accept that when these things happen, it's usually because our systems have a deeper need and that they are trying to be met. And if we can meet that need in an adaptive way, we will experience an increased sense of regulation, which almost always makes solving a problem easier. So, let's say we've already arrived at the point where the problems that we're dealing with have significantly worsened, and you feel that normal people don't let this problem happen or get this bad, and toxic shame is creeping into the corners. In that moment, when thinking about the problem, take the time to explain to yourself, gently and in a non-shaming way, why you are having that problem, and what sequence of events, if you can trace it, led you to this point in your life. Where it's possible that an intelligent, worthwhile person like yourself has not yet found a way to resolve it. Is this because you don't know how to ask for help or the resources you need, or is it because you feel too much shame to access the resources? Or is it because you don't know how to regulate yourself enough to solve the problem? Or have you created narratives around the problem where you can dissociate and ignore it? And if you get to that point, you may find yourself dissociating into some sort of fantasy and narrative where things are fixed and not as bad as they are. And none of those things are inherently shameful. They're all responses to having dealt with a difficult life. But it's also comforting to know that other people in the world have faced similar challenges, because these problems are a natural outcome of certain sequences of events, and not to diminish the things that occur, but to know that they are, in a sense, normal. So, personally, for myself, if I'm finding myself in a difficult situation, I like to try and ground myself and, if possible, take a few moments to meditate or try and look at the problem as if it was somebody else's, like a friend of mine. And using breathing exercises, but reconnecting with your body and knowing that you are connected to the world can be helpful. And what matters most is how you choose to internalize and represent these problems, and the more compassion you can have for yourself and others in these moments, the closer you can get to finding realistic solutions. Because toxic shame can often stem from having a belief that these are larger than average problems and makes you broken, shameful. But that is simply not true. You are not defined by your challenges. You are worthy of compassion and support. And it's not true. Nobody chooses a life filled with complex problems and inability to regulate around them. I don't think a person on earth would choose that, and you are not the exception to that rule. The way to reverse engineer this entire downward spiral and function more like a well-adapted person, even just for a moment, is to treat yourself with self-understanding and compassion, where toxic shame once dominated. Because when toxic shame overwhelms you, it can feel paralyzing, disorienting. But remember that feeling shame doesn't mean you are shameful. Can you recognize and name it as shame as it arises? This is important because shame is a feeling, and it doesn't define your character or the core of who you are. If you can have compassion and empathy for yourself in those moments, even briefly, you can start climbing out of this spiral. Compassion helps lessen toxic shame by reminding you that your problems are not personal, but a natural life consequence of your life experiences and coping mechanisms. And the less personal your problems feel, the less dysregulated you'll be, and also more likely able to deal with them better. Have you ever noticed that you can give good advice to like a friend, but then it's more difficult for you to turn that lens on yourself? I do. But this clarity can help enable you to seek the actual solutions and support necessary to address the practical problems in your life. And as the practical problems in your life start to get solved, you'll start to compound and become more regulated overall, creating a safer, more secure life for yourself. Like pulling away at the threads of a curtain that is blocking out the sun. You'll slowly unravel it and start to see more and more. And so, consequentially, your system will be better equipped to relate calmly to others, improving your relationships, as you're not constantly in a state of dysregulation. And calm and healthy relationships bring more support and comfort into your life, fostering a greater sense of belonging and community. And this sense of belonging and the resources you gain contribute to moving into an even more secure territory. From this place of security, you'll be able to better recognize what you need during stressful times and approach problem solving holistically. And this journey is a long one, and it is important to remember that you don't have to do it perfectly. Every time you choose self-understanding and compassion and a proper context for your challenges, even if it's just for a fraction of the time, you move closer to that secure and resourced place. And it's not an easy journey, but every step brings you closer to being more fulfilled and secure. A secure life with a secure attachment system are built through a series of moments where, even just for a minute, you can respond with compassion instead of shame and self-hate. And these moments of self-compassion and self-understanding accumulate over a lifetime, eventually leading to a life where self-love becomes the prevailing force. And once that balance shifts towards self-love, you'll notice an upward spiral naturally unfolding. So, that is all I have for today on shame, procrastination, and it's always important to have compassion for yourself. So, I hope that you have a great rest of your day, and you take care of yourself and those you love around you. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.